This is Popping the Bubble with hosts Sandra Ponce de Leon and Pete A. Turner.
This is Andy Wiedlin from Andreessen Horowitz, and you're on Popping the Bubble.
Hey, Andy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Sandra. How are you?
I'm awesome. Well, it's amazing to have you here. When I think of media superstars, I think of you. You've done so much. You've been at the Wedding Channel, at the Huffington Post, Yahoo, even MySpace, and most recently you were the CRO of BuzzFeed.
Yes, I was the CRO of Buzz Feed, but you had to mention MySpace, didn't you?
Sorry.
It sounded great, except when you mentioned that.
It's all very impressive.
I guess so.
I think MySpace, that's huge. Isn't that huge?
It was big at the time, as you well remember. We kind of crashed and burned and destroyed a lot of shareholder value. Learned a lot.
Well, you were able to apply all those learnings in your most recent gig as a CRO of BuzzFeed because you got them over to $100 million in revenue, right?
121.4 million, but it's not like I was counting
right.
or anything. Sandra.
Not that you would do that.
Right. Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, for all its faults, MySpace, I was able to learn social at MySpace, and MySpace was doing a lot of innovative things. But,
right.
And I took a lot of those lessons to Huffington Post and then BuzzFeed.
That's amazing. So can you share some secrets? How did you get BuzzFeed to where it is?
Well, BuzzFeed was founded by Jonah Peretti, who is a true genius, really sort of the brains and inspiration behind the whole thing. Jonah was at Huffington Post when I was there, so I knew of Jonah. When Huffington Post was bought by AOL, I needed to find a job, and I went and met with Jonah in a small office in the Village. We were supposed to have a 30-minute conversation. It turned into like a 3-hour yell fest. We were violently in agreement, whiteboarding, screaming.
You got to love that.
It was really fun. And I bought into his vision, was able to execute the revenue side of the business.
Yeah, that's amazing. What do you think was the tipping point for you guys? When did you know that it was going to be an amazing success?
You know, it's funny because when I started, I was employee 38. And so BuzzFeed had been around for 5 years before I was there. I felt like I was joining a startup, employee 38. We hired aggressively and we were growing. But when I started, nobody had heard of BuzzFeed. The advertising community hadn't heard of BuzzFeed. We only had a handful of sellers. It's not like we were some must buy or anybody knew what BuzzFeed was. And then over time, I guess we were known. And now I think BuzzFeed's a pretty well-known media property. But when you're in the midst of it, I never felt like there was a turning point. I always felt like we were this young, scrappy 38-person company, like just basically evangelizing, trying to get people to think about advertising and media differently. So I guess that there was, I do remember, there was one time when I was at this conference and I was railing against big media companies, big traditional media companies, and I was talking to some people, and they actually lumped BuzzFeed into that cadre of companies. Like all of a sudden we had like maybe not jumped the shark, but we were considered a traditional media company. And I'm like, wow, when did that happen?
Right.
There were little indicators or turning points along the way. But from my point of view, it was kind of heads down and try to get respectability. Right.
And BuzzFeed is all about social advertising. So what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, well, that was the reason I joined Jonah and John in 2011. Was I'd been in digital media for 10 or 15 years, I guess, and I sold billions of banners, and I never felt great about it. Like I never felt like they worked. I didn't think like consumers liked them. I don't think that they really were effective for advertisers. If you ask anybody if they remember a banner ad, nobody can remember one because they're just sort of ineffectual. And Jonah's point was, the internet is awesome and mobile is coming and video is coming and social platforms are here. And the awesome thing about the internet is people can find really cool stuff and play with it and share it with their friends. And you can do word of mouth marketing. And so why doesn't advertising work the same way? We all know that word of mouth marketing is the best kind of advertising. Why do we bombard people with crappy banners that they don't see or don't like and don't click on? If brands are strong enough, why don't they create on-brand content that people actually like and share with their friends? And so, he made a commitment to me that we weren't going to run any banner ads. We weren't going to do any sort of standard advertising. We were going to pioneer this new type of advertising, which is sort of branded content or native advertising or custom branded content, whatever you want to call it. It's basically advertising that doesn't suck, that people would actually like and share with their friends.
Right.
You know, it was fun to pioneer because I think that's a pretty powerful proposition, but there's this, you know, huge industry of, you know, sites and media buyers and agencies buying and selling banners that we had to get over.
Right.
The proposition was strong, and that was all Jonah's idea.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder, you know, I come actually from an advertising background as well and have sold banners as well. But
shame on you.
I know.
We're both going to hell. It's just.
But is the banner dead, do you think? Or, I mean, now it seems like it's evolved into now these pop-ups and pop-unders and takeovers and.
Yeah.
But it's still not giving people what they want. It's still not content that people want to consume. It's just a pain in the butt. You have to try to find that little X.
It is. And I guess for years it's been considered a necessary evil. If you wanted content for free, then you had to view advertising.
Right.
And 20 years ago, someone came up with the banner. It just seems weird to me that it's taken us so long to evolve away from that. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of been the fiat or the currency. It's like, if you want free content, you have to suffer through banners. But they don't make an impact. And if you do want to make them an impact, the kind of advertising you're talking about where they pop under or they take over your screen or they throw cookies on you, like that's the worst. I mean, that's even worse.
Yeah. And now it's on mobile.
And now it's on mobile. And like banner ads on mobile phones is not the answer. Mm-hmm, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly what is.
Right.
I think that this is a very exciting time for the business, but clearly banner ads on websites suck. Banner ads on cell phones suck harder. So I think like Jonah's original proposition where brands would create something that is on brand and likable and shareable will continue on as mobile becomes ubiquitous. But I think that, I mean, if we ever needed a reason to kill banners, now is the time. I mean, they just don't work, especially on cell phones.
Just put that nail in the coffin.
Just nail it. Boom.
Absolutely. I agree.
I also don't like when they put the X there and it's not an X. It just takes you,
that's so devious.
Yeah. And it makes me not want to consume that product, nor that site's product.
Yeah.
You know, like I just wave them all off.
Well, then, and the whole industry is kind of in a state of disruption because there's all these studies now that, you know, people are serving banner ads and they're serving 15 to a page and you don't see them, but it counts as credit. So there's fraud.
There's click fraud, right?
There's you know, viewability.
And
if you don't
ad
see
blockers.
Ad blockers. There's viewability problems. And so I don't think banners were particularly effective ever. But if you have ad blockers, they're going away there. But if you can't view them, they're clearly not effective. And then if there's fraud, then to me, the whole efficacy, the whole argument for banners that, nobody loves them, but at least it's a stable currency, that's going out the window with all these recent trends.
Right. And I think the other trend that you see with publishers especially, and I really don't know how publishers other than BuzzFeed are going to survive because now you've got most of the content for publisher sites being consumed on Facebook.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the future for publishers?
Well, I was at Yahoo where we had Yahoo News. And I was at Huffington Post, which is a news site, and BuzzFeed is a news and entertainment site. And you go to conferences and a lot of publishers, especially in the magazine and the newspaper space, they'll say, news is dead. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, news has never been a better time to be in news.
Do they blame that on BuzzFeed?
Often, right? You know, they'll listicles, goddamn, but it wasn't BuzzFeed's fault, right? It's, to me, consumers are completely and totally in charge, and technology has enabled them to get the content how they want it, where they want it, when they want it. That's not BuzzFeed's fault. That's just aligning with hard facts, right? When you talk to publishers, so many of them are just so unwilling to change. Mm. And the longer you've been around, the harder it is to change.
Right.
And so when the New York Times says it's really hard to be in the news business, I'm like, are you crazy? Like, you have the best brand. You have the best reporters. You break stories. People have never been more enamored with news. People are junkies on their phones, constantly looking for news.
Right.
And you can't make it. And so I think it's a bad time to be in the newspaper business. I think it's a bad time to be in the cutting down trees and printing
Most
newspapers
definitely.
and delivering them to people's houses a day late. I think that's a terrible business. But to be in the news business where, things are, consumers are on Twitter or on Facebook or Snapchat and they're looking for new stuff. I think it's a great time to be in the news business.
Yeah, we're not even on a 24-hour news cycle anymore. It's like a 8-second news cycle.
Absolutely. And people are, one of the things that Jonah was trying to come up with a name for BuzzFeed. And
right.
One of the other alternative titles was the Bored at Work Network, right? And because that's where BuzzFeed would get traffic. People were bored at work and they'd go check out a list or they'd check out cute pets or dogs or whatever.
Right.
And now it's like people are bored everywhere. They're bored in line at the bank. They're bored waiting for the subway. And, we're holding these powerful supercomputers in our hands and demanding connectivity and new stories to flood in. And we want to play with them and watch it and share it. I think it's a fantastic time to be in this business.
But it is not a good time to be a news publication where you're using a paper-based media.
No, well, that's just stupid.
Yeah, it is. That time is over.
I'm old. I love a newspaper.
Sure.
To me, that's like the most gluttonous. It's like the best simple pleasures.
With coffee.
You get a coffee, you're sitting back, you're enjoying it. But don't you think that's just
It is a pleasure, yeah.
It's so extreme that someone would curate all these stories for me and print them out and deliver them to my home. Who does that? That's just so luxurious.
Do you get any newspapers delivered?
If I say yes, then all of a sudden I'm like an old person and everybody's going to turn off the podcast. But I do love a newspaper. But
only once a week.
What's that?
I said only once a week.
I get them occasionally, and it is a guilty pleasure. But I also have all sorts of news apps. I'm consulting with a lot of really interesting news companies. Mike,
right,
which is Millennial for News, does a great job. Now This News, which is all social mobile video, does a great job with news. I think there's a lot of, it's odd because, sites like Time and Newsweek and Washington Post and New York Times, these venerable brands, you think that, they have brand identity, they have great reporters, they've been doing this for 100 years. You'd think that they would be good at it, but it's really hard for these traditional companies to morph into sort of modern, the kind of news you're talking about where you want it, updated every 5 minutes. But they should, and they can if they make the tough choices.
But there's a reason why companies that make Nickelodeons don't exist anymore for the most part, and this technologies and things move, especially when it comes to media, it moves so fast. Kodak was ubiquitous.
Yes.
And now it's a thing from the past.
Yeah. But I guess one of the things, if you're in venture capital, you look for hard trends, right? And there's this saying, say the river flows, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at hard media trends or hard technology trends, or you look at consumer behavior and you see that, we've been talking about the year of mobile is coming. It's not like a surprise. And now it's here. Well, we've known that it's coming.
Right.
Right. We've known that people have been taking photos with their phones for years. And we knew it's a pain in the ass to go to the store and load it with film and get it. Shame on them.
Right.
They were disrupted, and shame on them because they should have been the owners of this.
Yes.
Right. So what's going to happen to the New York Times now that they've implemented a paywall? Is that going to save them?
Well, it's funny. Ariana Huffington, who's wonderful, she had a saying that consumers generally will not pay for content unless it's really arcane financial information or really weird porn.
Oh.
And I think she's right. Mm-hmm. And so, I guess the New York Times is such a great institution and people love it so much that they can make money. The Wall Street Journal has a paywall. I just feel like that is like putting a finger in the dike. It's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
That audience is dying out. And also there's enough people consume, they have the subscription and they make their money by consuming that product and blogging about it. So I'll go find out what I want to find out. The LA Times will give me 5 free stories a month.
Yeah.
And I use all 5 stories, but I will never pay for it. I have never paid for the ESPN paywall thing. I won't do it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that people want their content and they think that it should be free.
Yeah.
You know, who's to say they're in charge? I mean, what if I were the New York Times, I would stop screwing around with paywalls and I would make my app and I would make my web experience relevant. Mm-hmm. I mean, like the font's terrible. It's hard to read. It's super long form. There's not enough video. There's not enough quizzes. There's not enough lists. I mean, they could do better. Mm-hmm. Big sports fan. I love ESPN.
Sure.
Right? But the app is atrocious. It takes like 7 clicks to get to the standings.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what is that?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these companies are going to go through a lot of tumultuous change. And look, I've always worked at startups, so it's easy for me to say, oh, you should be disruptive, you should institute change. If you're a big company, New York Times, you're a magazine, and you're making all that money on print, right? All that money's coming in, and you know it's going to go away, but you still got all that money coming in. You're just kind of looking at your watch saying, okay, I got 3 more years till retirement. Right? I'm just going to milk it, and it's someone else's problem.
At some point, you have to have taken the clue from all the other industries that have been disrupted, that have been replaced, and there's more robots coming. I mean, Jeremiah Avian came on the show and said, you know, robots are coming, and they're going to replace a lot of lower-paying jobs.
Yeah, but if you're in a position of power, you're going to kick the can. One of the interesting things with Andreessen Horowitz is they do a lot of thought leader dinners. And so I've had the opportunity to sit with startup guys, like the guys from Rap Genius who are at dinner with me. They're a lot of fun.
Right.
And then a lot of people from TV, ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, A&E, like really great brands. And we're sort of in violent agreement about how things are being disrupted, and they know that young people aren't watching TV and that they have like a viewership problem, and the linear TV experience is not great anymore because there's too many commercials. But they make so much money on 30-second spots, and you tell them, how, you know, you say, well, at BuzzFeed, we're doing this, this, and this, and you tell them how much we make, and they're like, not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm retiring in 4 years. That's someone else's problem. And so it's, even though we're looking at the data and we're kind of agreeing with it, and we're looking at the hard trends, and we're kind of like saying, okay, this is happening. You know,
that's crazy.
If you're living in Connecticut and you're making good money and you're taking a, limit of work, are you really going to make the hard changes? That's just human nature. I don't think that they have the fortitude to do it.
Wow.
And that's where the disruptors come in.
Yeah. Right? And sometimes it's like, I'm sure CNN and all the other great networks are hiring disruptors to make it happen because they're not stupid. It's just hard to disrupt from within. Mm-hmm. It's very easier. Hard. I mean, it's very hard to be a startup and disrupt, but I think Jonah and BuzzFeed did a great job disrupting because there was no other choice.
Right.
There's no other choice. That's how we could survive.
Right. And they managed to do it with Facebook, even taking a bigger piece of the pie in terms of eyeballs.
Yeah. BuzzFeed's business model before instant articles on Facebook was you create content that's so good that people share it.
Right.
And then it appears in the feed, and if people click on it, you go back to BuzzFeed and you can make money on your site. But Jonah realized that that's not consumer behavior. If you're on Facebook, you want to read the stuff on Facebook. And so he took a big bet, and he's publishing his content on these social channels, and he's experimenting with how to make money. And I think Facebook's a great partner. I mean, people often... Traditional companies complain because, they changed the rules and like I get no virality and they're punishing me for clickbait. It's like, yeah, they're all about the consumer experience, but they also know that they are an awesome social platform and they need great content publishers to make the ecosystem work. Right. And so I think they do reward innovative companies that are playing by the rules and providing a great consumer experience. They don't want to be in that business. God, being the publisher is hard, but they do realize that having great content is important. And so they're experimenting with ways to help publishers monetize stuff as long as it doesn't crush the consumer experience.
Do they buy the New York Times at some point? Like when it's devalued and you're mostly just buying the name?
Well, I have no idea, but that's an interesting, fascinating question. I can opine on it if you'd like.
Please, speculate. Opine. I love opine. That's one of my favorite words.
Well, I mean, So I think Facebook has bigger fish to fry. I think they bought Oculus because they're looking at virtual. I think they're looking 10 years down the road at technology and platform plays. And I think that content's important to their ecosystem, but it's probably better if they don't get into that business. I haven't seen them buy any.
The WhatsApp, but that was really for the users.
That's for the users, and that's a platform. That's
Right.
an application.
Right.
That's
Right.
not like news.
No.
Right?
No.
And so I don't know. First of all, I don't know if the New York Times is for sale.
It will be.
Yeah.
Someone's going to have to say, what can we get for this name? You know, we got all
Well,
these
look,
signs.
it's a great brand name, and
Sure.
I love the New York Times, the content. I think they have a lot to work to do to make themselves relevant with young people. I just don't see Facebook as, like, why would they bother?
Right.
mean,
They're
look
looking
at-
ahead, not looking behind.
Yeah.
Look at Nat Geo. If you're going to do the VR thing, right,
Yeah.
and Facebook's going to get in there, Nat Geo is not a magazine company anymore. Yeah, you can get a subscription and go ahead and do that. But they have a channel. They create content.
Yeah.
Are they
And
in
it-
VR now?
They have
They should
got to be
be. They gotta
talking
be.
about
That's so.
it.
That
Yeah.
would be so cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's for the space that
But see,
New York
think
Times
about
needs
that.
to
I
be.
think of like Nat Geo as like this old magazine company.
Right.
But think of all the beautiful images that they've
Yes.
created, and it's evergreen.
Right.
I mean, and they have the best photographers.
But they're not selling magazines anymore. You know, they're selling video content and
Yes.
experience content. If VR is coming, VR's here.
Yes.
You know, someone has to start creating that content. Why wouldn't the New York Times do something like that if they want to be relevant? I mean, how else can they
New
stay
York
relevant?
Times or Nat Geo?
Well, no,
They're
I'm
both.
talking about the New York Times. Yeah, but both especially. But I mean, Nat Geo's already going in the water. Why wouldn't the New York Times do a virtual Beirut story?
Yeah.
You got Christina.
Amapur,
Yeah,
right?
I couldn't get my tongue to say it.
But here's
yeah.
the deal: it's like, so if like it's just a different. So when I was at Huffington Post, and we set our sights on the New York Times, and the New York Times is a great publication, and Huffington Post, look, it's a liberal blogging site. What are we doing, right? We don't even have our own reporters,
Right.
And like we set our sights on them. We said, look, we want to be bigger than them, right? And the things that New York Times has going for them is they're the great lady, all the news that fits the print, 150-year tradition, the best reporters, 36 printing presses. I mean, like they have so many assets, but those assets actually are the reasons that they're going to fail.
Yes.
And the Huffington Post is like, okay, we're going to aggregate news. We're going to allow people to comment on it. We're going to make it really viral. It's going to be totally shareable. It's going to be very visual. We're going to do lists. And that's what people want, especially in a mobile environment. And so, like, should the New York Times have been better at this? Yes. Should they have had better engineers? Yes. But also their reporters, the way that they write a great piece of journalism and then they go on to the next thing and they don't get any feedback on whether it was well received or whether it was shared or whether it was
Right.
criticized. Like, there's no feedback loop.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah, you need to adapt to what consumers want.
right. And at the Huffington Post, when a reporter would write a story, every hour they would see the metrics like,
Oh, wow.
how much is it getting clicked on? Is it getting shared? Who's sharing it? What are the comments? And so they very quickly understand what people like and what they share. And that's just a huge advantage in a sort of a social sharing game.
Right.
You also don't see the New York Times writers participating in the threads that they generate from their articles.
No.
And that's just, you're not above the thread,
Although, you know, it's,
but you are physically,
and-
you know, you have to be in it.
I probably have to go back because back in the day, I thought that the threads were the most interesting part. But now the internet has become so trolly and people are
that's
just
true.
attacking. And there's a lot of sites
Oh
that,
gosh, yes.
like, to me, I think the comments are fascinating and it's very interesting and you get new points of view and you can go down the rabbit hole with people that really care about an issue. But a lot of sites are just turning off comments because the internet has become so awful and
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. A caustic thread's no good to anybody, but
Yeah.
participating with your audience that receives your message well,
Yeah.
you can't get that from the New York Times authors.
Well, that was one of the things we would do is we would look at the Huffington Post would report a story and the New York Times would report a story. And you
Right.
could judge which is the better story. And then you would look at the number of comments and like nobody felt worthy to comment on a New York Times story. You get like one or two people saying something, but like the Huffington Post would get thousands and thousands of people weighing in. It was really like participatory journalism or citizen journalism where people really live the story, I think that's great for news.
That's cool. Well, you've learned a lot about what makes content great or what people want to consume these days. So what makes for a good story?
I mean, it's funny. Sometimes you think you publish the perfect piece and then it's a dud. And then otherwise we were talking about your podcast.
Yeah.
Some of the
greatest podcast ever,
like fall flat. And then some are like, meh, they actually do great. So you don't really know. So I think a lot of testing is important, but yeah, especially in the early days of BuzzFeed, we'd look at some of our viral hits and try to figure out why stories were shared at a high rate. Some of it is, were they emotional? Did it touch an emotional string? Like, did it pull on your heartstrings? People like to share emotional things. That said, this made me feel like this. I wanted to share with this happy story, sad story, emotional story, lovely story. It's like an emotional gift.
Right.
And so there's that. Humor tends to share pretty well. People are just basically pathetic and like to show how smart and clever they are. So, like, did you know stuff? Or that's another, like, why quizzes took off, right? Like, people would love to take quizzes, and if they scored well, they'd share them with their friends. But there's a whole science to shareable content. Mm-hmm. Jonah's great at it. There's a lot of companies that are focusing on that. Mike and Now This News.
Mike is, how do you spell that?
MIC.
MIC, okay.
Yeah. Chris Olczyk is the CEO. Really great guy. And he sort of had the same point of view that I was talking about before, is people were saying that millennials weren't interested in the news. And he's a very young guy. And he's like, no, like millennials really love the news. We just have to present it differently. And so if you go to the Mike site, it's a lot of stories that appeal to millennials, whether it's heartwarming stories or stories about people in their generation. A lot of video, a lot of images, a lot of quick news hits. I think he does a nice job.
Cool. I'll have to check them out.
Yeah.
Is news going to continue to fragment into smaller groups? Like I know on BuzzFeed. Actually, let's just get this out in the open. Whoever created that bullshit cargo short story, man, I want to strangle that guy.
You wearing cargo shorts?
I always have a pocket on there because I've always got something in my pockets.
Right.
I'm a man. I have things to do.
You have a beef? You have a beef with the cargo?
Yeah.
You should maybe start a new site in defense of the cargo pants.
Right. Yes.
.com.
But it's more representation of I'm not in that demo. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't care what my shorts look like. I wear my clothes for utilitarian purpose. There's a collar on my shirt because I'm going to see you, and I figured you'd have a collar in your shirt. That's why I have a collar on my shirt.
And
otherwise,
I'm wearing a wife beater. It's so. It's
I got that one wrong.
Yeah.
But is it going to continue to fragment? Because Mike is not going to resonate with me the way they approach stories, the things they say. I'm going to want to wring people's necks when I read it.
Are you sure though?
Yeah.
But you like BuzzFeed articles minus this one.
Well,
right?
Actually, I honestly don't ever go to BuzzFeed. It just hasn't ever caught my attention.
But you see it in the feed and you read stories and watch videos, don't you?
If it's on something else, maybe. I don't particularly consume BuzzFeed. I might see something I'm interested in. I might take a quiz or whatever. So I don't know. I don't know that millennial-based news would resonate with me in a positive way, where I would be inclined to consume a product. But we also have the ability to sort my news. I mean, if I put a search in and all of a sudden, like I looked at our Zoom recorder the other day because I was looking at some attachments. I can't stop getting ads for Zoom things. I already own a Zoom, right? Yeah. So I know the news can be customized to what I want. Is that going to continue to happen? I mean, all these sites are geared towards younger people because there's a big bulge in the population that obviously companies want to sell to them, but there's also a lot of folks that are in other demographics.
Yeah, I think that there will be fragmentation. I think one of the reasons, and you pointed this out, why are there so many news sites for young people? And why is there so much effort to reach young people through digital?
Right.
And it's not just lists, it's actually video, right? So, and I think the reason is that, or why I think it's a good business is because you used to be able to reach young people via TV.
Right.
And young people aren't watching TV anymore. Right? It's just not happening.
Nope.
And you look at all the statistics and people from TV will say, well, we had a great year and TV's growing. It's growing with old people.
Yes.
Right? If you're 65 plus, you're watching a lot of TV more than ever. right? But if you're 18 to 20, 13 to 18, 19 to 24, any of the demos that advertisers want to reach, you can't reach them on terrestrial TV anymore. And you can't reach them on Netflix because they don't have an ad product.
Right.
Really hard on Hulu, right? Can't reach them on HBO Go. And so the way that you would build brand in the past is you would run TV commercials to reach your most vital audience, young people, because they spend money. You're trying to get them early in their life cycle. There's a bunch of reasons why advertisers covet young people.
Right.
And TV was the medium to do it. And now they're not on TV. And everybody's going, oh, what do you do?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that there's a lot of investment in companies that use video to reach young people. And Mike is an example of that.
Not only are they not watching TV, my daughter's 19 years old and she's working on moving out right now. So she's out of the house. She has no plans, no desires to ever buy a TV. Ever.
It's so funny. So I have a 19-year-old daughter. She's going to head off to art school, and she loves TV. She watches everything.
Really?
Right? A big TV watcher, right? And so I'm going, what are you going to do? She's like, are you going to pay? Like, you're on a budget. Are you going to get DirecTV? Are you going to get Comcast? She's like, hell no. I'm going to get Netflix.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll buy a flat screen on Black Friday. But the idea, you can consume great TV content. You just don't have to do it with a big screen TV, and you certainly don't have to wade through 5-minute commercial pods.
Yeah.
And then 4 minutes of programming. What's that?
And pay Comcast.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I really feel like it's just a very Zen thing where two things are opposite yet equally true. Like, TV has never been better. There are amazing shows on television.
Yes.
And yet the TV watching experience is incredibly broken. Do you remember? I'm old enough to remember like when cable came and it's like, oh, well, you pay for cable, but you'll get better quality and you won't get any commercials.
Never have a commercial. Right.
Never a commercial. I go, okay. And then of course, stupid us, we believe them.
Yes.
So then they start the commercials and now it's just like they're in this death spiral where they're losing subscribers. And yet they still need to make money. And so the commercial pods have gone from 2 minutes to 3 minutes, 3 minutes to 4 minutes. Like, you can't watch a movie on TV without a DVR. And so they killed the golden goose.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't ever watch TV. I don't have any shows that I watch.
Okay, but let's say you're on the road, right?
Okay.
And you're in a hotel that doesn't have a DVR.
Right.
And you turn on the TV and all of a sudden, pick a movie. Godfather 2.
Oh, I wouldn't watch it on TV. I
Really?
wouldn't.
You have that much stamina, self-control. Like, I get drawn in and then I want to kill myself because,
Like every time I see Smokey and the Bandit come on, and I love Smokey and the Bandit, I would rather go spend $3 on Amazon and rent it and see it with all the right words and all that, because it's edited for TV, and I don't want 42 minutes of programming in an hour.
Really, Smokey and the Bandit, that's not one I'd stop for.
And I'll watch Godfather, but I'll either own it or I'll pay to have it or just do something else. I mean,
all right, Sandra, what movie would you stop for?
What movie would I stop for? You're going to stump me. I'm not the biggest movie.
Really?
No.
You big media person?
No, I know. I really don't know.
Okay.
I have to come back to that.
Okay.
But I do have a question for you.
Yes.
Just kind of switching gears a little bit, because being a media guy, you have to watch commercials. You have to, know media campaigns. So is there any cool new media campaigns that have really resonated with you?
what do you want to sell? Like, what do you see out there?
Well, I think there are great TV commercials still.
Right.
Like the things that will make me stop. And it just off the top of my head, Geico always is
Clever.
pushing the envelope and trying new things. I think Progressive, it's another thing that's the most boring industry, insurance. And yet you have Geico and Progressive trying different things. State Farm and Allstate try. I don't think they're nailing it.
They're in the game. Esurance tries.
Esurance, they try, right? But they're like interesting things. I think Bud Light, right? Like they thought far enough advance to know that there was going to be Olympics and there was going to be an election, and they wanted to make a social stand with young people. And so they have Seth Rogen and Amy Schumer, and I think it's clever.
Yeah.
I think they're doing it. I think TV, like this is a great time for TV commercials in the United States. Sorta.
Sort of.
Like maybe 2% of the commercials are worth watching. And then like you get the general and you get the direct response crap.
Right.
That is awful. And to me, like it's really hard for great TV commercials to thrive when they're in a commercial pod. And it's just like you're watching 10 commercials back to back, waiting for your show. It's just not a great experience.
Right.
So I think it's hard for brands to break through with awesome creative because of the medium.
I just saw recently that new Kenzo ad. I don't know if you've seen it,
No.
but it's on Facebook and it's making the rounds. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll share it with you.
All right. Oh, can I just say one thing?
Yes,
So
please.
I was at a conference and I was arguing with this English guy, and he was claiming that commercials are content and all advertising is content. And I was saying that most commercials are not content, but the stuff that BuzzFeed does, this native advertising, that is like sort of content. And we were having this really big argument about it. And then we realized that in England and in the UK, like you can only have so many commercial pods, right?
Right.
Like you can only have like 4 commercials in a row. And so it's a much better experience. And their commercials are actually good. They're actually really great content.
Yeah.
And so I think when we have these discussions, we should probably make sure that we're talking about the US right now, which has this, this
Right.
just tons and tons of like awful TV commercials. Whereas in other countries, you know, you have really delightful stuff.
They actually are telling a story.
Yeah.
You mentioned being an executive in residence at Andreessen Horowitz now.
Yes.
Is there any particular company that you're really excited about that you're helping out with? Or
Yeah. Andreessen's a great firm. It's funny. EIRs, it sounds great, but it's sort of a hands-off relationship. They'll call me if there's a company that they think I might be able to help, and I always try to help, but it's not a full-time job in the slightest. Some of the companies I've worked with are like, for example, Rap Genius.
oh, right.
I think they're interesting and doing interesting things. I'm advising 12 other companies just
12,
on my
wow.
own. Yeah. And they sort of, most of them are in the sort of the social mobile video space, which I think is a very exciting space. And it's an area that I have a lot of interest in. I'm pretty passionate about, and they often come to me for some advice. And so sometimes I give a little advice, and sometimes I give a little bit more advice. I'm really excited about the space. People complain about the news space. Maybe we should call it the news space with a small n. Like anything new, like what you're saying, people want to know what's new.
Right.
And you can call that news, I guess, if you want, but everybody wants the new thing. And it's what I'm kind of fired up about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andy. It's been an amazing conversation. Love hearing your thoughts on what's happening in media.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I've got a face for radio or podcasts, so I'm glad this was
And the wife beater
video
looks
enabled.
amazing on you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm going to star in an episode of Cops after this. They're gonna...
You've been working out a lot, I can tell.
Yeah, you should go yell out the window and shake your fist at people.
Yeah,
You know?
that's what I'll do next.
That'd be good.